I come to economics as a working class person who became conscious of the fact that essentially my family and my community were given a really tough set of cards, and really those cards were stacked against us. And I think what I learned over time is that economics was a tool to talk about power, and a tool to understand why it is that the world looked the way it did and how it is that we could go about changing it. So I'm from Port Adelaide. So I'm actually from Adelaide, and I've moved around lots of different places. Before I came to this role as the senior economist at the Future Work, I was actually a public sector unionist. So I was a national organiser with the CPSU in Canberra, where I was previously a public servant. So I come to a discussion about public sector unionism and economics from a perspective of having been a public servant, and having a deep respect for the work of people who give themselves to public sector work, and a desire to expand that work. This point in time we're in now is a very clear emergence of these battle lines that are coming up between the ability of us to maintain our public services and the erosion of those through essentially free market fundamentalism, which is everything that this coalition government is about. So I've got some Prezzo slides for you, and I know it's not always super engaging because you can't see me in person. So I'm going to move my mouth and my face around a lot and my hands to try and sort of keep you engaged. But also, I'm going to try and talk to people or respond to things in the chat if you want to pop up something, even if it's just to say yeah, cool, agree, or don't agree. What do you think? Ask me a question. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen, and then we're gonna get started. All right, so that's not the start slide. There we go. Can you guys confirm you see that? All right, so we're calling this Prezzo making the same mistake. That's basically what it looks like we're about to do. And what are the self-defeating consequences of belt tightening? And by that I mean austerity, cutting the public sector, and wage freezes, cutting the pay of public sector workers. And we don't want to make the same mistake, because we've been down this road before. It was called the Depression, and we had 10 years of stagnation, and the same commentators and some economists saying if we just cut spending, if we just cut wages, then we'll deal with unemployment. And it's exactly the same things we're hearing now, which is if people just tighten their belts, if they take a pay cut, it's the sacrifice they make, and at some point unemployment will decline. And I'm here to tell you that this is false. This is furphy, and it's a very destructive and damaging and dangerous idea. It's also morally repugnant, right? Because public servants and public sector workers have been at the core of the essential workers who pulled us through the crisis that we're in right now. And these people are doing this work across the world, not just sort of front healthcare workers, but also people working in policy, council workers engaged in essential goods, essential services, cleaners, etc. So there's my deets if anyone wants to track me down on Twitter. It's something that I have to do for my work. I never wanted to use Twitter, but now I do. So what we're looking at is, this is a graph that's showing if 100 is the year before a peak. So we're starting, it's basically just a measure of where we start, and you're measuring GDP growth over time, and these are quarters. And then you can see the 1990s recession. This was the kind of contraction we had in overall national income growth, GDP growth. And this is the kind of recession that we're looking at now. And I know it looks comical, but that's what a 20% contraction looks like. We are looking at potentially 10% in the June quarter alone, the next stats that come out. So this is quite a big deal. It's unprecedented, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing this term. But really, there is nothing like this, and the way that this crisis has borne out is being different to other times. It wasn't a problem in the private sector, goods production that emerged elsewhere and spilled over into other parts of the economy. It wasn't like the GFC where we had a financial crisis. We intentionally shut down parts of the economy to stop the contraction of COVID-19. because high levels of contraction and disease would have long-term impacts, not just on the health of people, but also on our ability to function as a society, including an economy. So all of those customer-facing sectors were the first to be shut down. So it's retail, hospitality, arts and entertainment, personal services, airlines, and other transport workers. And looking at those industries, we're also seeing now that with the new ABS labour force stats, that the people affected in those industries is not an even spread across demographics and genders. We are talking predominantly young people and women who have been most affected by those immediate shutdowns. And those spillovers, once you shut down those sectors, we see there's spillover impacts spread to other parts of the economy. So a clear example of how this plays out is if you can't have retail stores anymore, then eventually the wholesalers that are fulfilling existing orders to deliver a certain amount of stock to stores, they have to shift their orders because they're not selling. And then that eventually spreads into manufacturing. You're not producing those things to sell in the stores anymore. So you can see how actually early we are in the stages of seeing the full impact of this crisis, contrary to claims that this is, the snapback is on its way. I think we're going to see disruptions to supply chains for some time. And one issue that's emerged as a key risk for Australia is that because we killed our manufacturing sector, we haven't been able to supply and produce the things that we need in a medical crisis. Like 96% of the medical goods are imported. So this has been a side discussion is about how do we rebuild the Australian manufacturing sector. Of course, unions have been, have had plenty to say about what's happened to what has been a traditionally highly unionised sector. And there's, I would say, not a surprise and a reason why those sectors were shut down. And those chain reactions then spread out from that. So the crisis isn't just the shutdown areas, it spills out into other areas. And then once people's wages, their incomes are cut, they stop spending as much, business stop investing as much because they lose confidence. It impacts on our ability to export. So you can see that this is the emerging picture. What we can expect is carnage. We could have 2 to 3 million jobs lost, maybe more. This picture is still emerging. The true unemployment rate, which was announced today as 7%, it's not true, because if you include people who are dropping out of the labour market and people who have worked, haven't got any hours but are still termed as employed, or they've lost most of their hours, the true unemployment rate is about 20%, which is about 3 million people. And as I mentioned before, women and young workers have been the most affected. A decline in GDP of about 10% or more is likely to happen in the June quarter. And there'll be immediate losses there has been immediate losses of incomes to workers and families, businesses and organisations, forcing people to stop spending, which forces businesses to stop spending, and then they cut jobs. This is an unprecedented time in our history. This type of decline is much faster and deeper and more profound than even in the 1930s when we had the Depression. So at this point, for all people who respect our current living standards and hope to progress as a society and be able to deal with all of the huge policy challenges we have on the other side of all of this, I'm thinking of climate change in particular, is to stop this from becoming a depression. We want to stop long-term stagnation, high levels of unemployment, and we want to be able to expand our public sector to step up and carry this and lead us out of here. That's what I think anyway. So the government response so far, really they rushed to businesses' aid the quickest. And you can see in that first stimulus, which came out March 12, we've worked out that about 75% of that stimulus went to businesses and only 25% to households. And that was $750 payments, which government first thought was going to be enough income to keep everyone happy and everything ticking over. Wasn't enough. Then they brought in a second stimulus, and we equated that to be 70% being handed to business in, I think, more favourable loan conditions, tax offsets for their capital investments, and they doubled the job seeker payment in that time. And that was an incredibly great and necessary step forward for a woefully low payment, which was keeping people in long-term dire poverty. So then the final stimulus, which I've put in red there because it didn't reach the 130 billion, but that was the JobKeeper wage subsidy to try and keep people connected to their jobs and to stop that severing process. Because once we've severed people from jobs, it becomes, I mean, there's a huge disruption to people's lives, but it becomes much more expensive and more difficult to recreate businesses, recreate jobs, get people back into those jobs. And there was a quite significant amount of funding that came through and initiatives to make banking and credit and borrowing cheaper in the hope that people would borrow and invest, yet to be seen. So we did a lot of work on the JobKeeper wage subsidy. It didn't apply to public sector workers. For some council workers, we can see this has been playing out terribly for councils who are underfunded. They haven't been able to maintain some of their essential workers. But the broader issues are that it was basically designed to be, it was weaponized, and it was designed to exclude key areas of the labour market that government and bigger businesses wanted to maintain. Well, the forms of employment that people hold, there was an interest in maintaining those forms of employment. So short-term casuals were cut out of the JobKeeper subsidy. So anyone on the books for less than 12 months, which did mostly affect young people, and migrant workers who have been locked out of all forms of public support, and it's put them in a pretty dire situation because they can't access healthcare, any basic incomes, or any subsidies for their jobs. So the JobKeeper payment, in a really overview, quick sort of, I want to go through all of the various boxes, but I'm sure that we can share these slides. What it did is protected the value of casual work, because casual work is big business. That makes lots of money for really big employers that use casual work. So what that did is it helped to maintain the primacy of casual work, and it also weaponized, it gave extra power to employers to be able to cut wages by getting more control over work hours and the awards. Essentially, they were able to push some changes through the awards. So what we're looking at in this time is, because, you know, in economics is also a lot about power, and it's about looking at who are the most powerful actors right now. I sure as hell wish the labour movement was stronger than it is, and we're going to be fighting like all hell to make sure that we build a more democratic response to this crisis. But the loudest voices right now are business lobbyists, large sectors of capital, in particular mining and resources, who wield huge amounts of power over our polity and over our society. And, you know, even our big, you know, duopolies, they have huge impacts on our wages and workplace conditions. And so what we're going to see is a ramp up on an opportunistic push to cut wages. Wage growth was already at record lows before this. The Centre for Future Work has done a lot of work tracking the wages crisis in the lead up to this point in time. And these new attacks on wages are coming from all over. So there are calls to freeze the national minimum wage, and that would obviously flow onto the awards, make EAs and enterprise agreements weaker, and the ability of unions to represent people weaker. The public sector wage freezes, which is mainly what we're here to talk about, which I've put in here in brackets cuts, because that's what a freeze is. And a lot of the false assumptions that we're going to hear peddled out in this time is that stuff like lower wages are necessary to create and protect existing jobs. That's false. And that this shared sacrifice is one that's fair. And really what we have to be preparing ourselves for is a fight to defend wages and rights in this time. This shows you the wage stagnation problem we had leading into the COVID crisis. It's quite clear that really since 2013, we've had a significant decline in overall wage growth. In fact, we had levels of wage growth, long-term stagnation that was worse than the worst period of stagnation in the post-war era. So this was all before COVID, the COVID crisis. So the dangers of wage freezes is that, first of all, we have to acknowledge where they're coming from, which is both political parties, major political parties. And this is because they have this slavish adherence to a marketized model of job creation. The idea that the private sector has a monopoly on how to create jobs. People who work in the public sector know that there are other ways to create jobs. It's called public sector employment. The optics of being able to be seen to be doing something is very strong. And I think, like, regardless of where you sit on a political, political parties, I think parties think it's a vote winner, and they're going to get support if they have a go at public servants and public sector workers. I'm questioning really whether they're going to be punished for that, because I think that I hope that Australians have gotten behind public sector workers. We've been here before, and as I said at the start, this is what was said during the Depression: if we cut wages, we're going to deal with unemployment. Was not the case. During the GFC, we also had the same problem, and I'm going to show you in a graph. Actually, what happened was the public sector was cut, and it had impacts on wages. It brought us to the problem that we are in now. So the real impacts are self-defeating. They impose long-run losses on affected workers. It reduces consumer spending just when we need more. Especially like Australia has such a high level of small businesses that depend on disposable incomes. And if you start cutting those disposable incomes, you can bet that Scott Morrison's engine of growth, or whatever he calls the small businesses, which is all rhetoric, but they're going to be the ones who first go, because they're going to lose their very sort of marginal incomes that they had. The other reason why wage freezes are so dangerous is because they set a benchmark to the rest of the economy. It's a very visible benchmark because the government is the largest employer in the economy. So if they say we're going to set wages at 2%, or we're going to cut wages, or wage increases, what that does is give free rein to the private sector to do the same. And history proves that that's exactly how it happens. It also enhances the risk of deflation. We don't want to get into a deflationary spiral, because that's when we can't rely on the prices of anything anymore. It reduces confidence. People can't spend. The value of their money declines. They can't buy as much with what they had. And the other self-defeating consequence of wage freezes is that it reduces tax revenues. I think in our report, which I'll get shared with everyone, Director Jim Stanford, he finds that it's something like 35% of the supposed saving of cutting from public sector wages is lost, because that would immediately go into revenues, which actually that would make sense, because that's the taxation rate. So long-run income losses, sometimes a graph helps us to kind of just visualize what the impact of a temporary sacrifice looks like. This is often what is said. It's a temporary sacrifice followed by a normal pattern of compensation. But those cuts have permanent impacts, and those impacts, they follow the worker through the rest of their career. So I've got here we got an average worker on a $1,500 a week salary. This is before tax, I assume. This is hypothetically what happens is in that third year, they experience a pay freeze, and they did have a 2.5% pay increase before, which is about the rate that the public sector has had the last few years. They grow again after that third year it's been cut, but you can see, because you're starting off from a lower nominal wage base point, those losses extend into the career, and over 10 years they accumulate to $23,000 in losses. So I think public sector workers think, okay, what's the short-term hit? But actually it's that long-term hit over time that has big impacts. Without that catch-up increase, and that future wage path is permanently lower. And those future wage increases are smaller because they're applied to a smaller base rate. And because, of course, our superannuation system is the contributions are paid on the basis of your income. If you reduce that income, then you're also carrying that burden into your retirement, and that means lower investment income, lower incomes from lower investment, and also that means that the payout when you do retire is going to be lower. So your actual pension payout is lower. We did a simulation of what some of the proposals for the public sector pay cuts were, where they were coming from. So Commonwealth APS, excuse my red squiggly line. I didn't deal with my Word doc issues before I uploaded it. So the average salary of an APS worker is $91,500. The freeze, they've proposed 6 months. You can see that that's a foregone increase of 2%. That initial annual loss, $915. So you can see if someone, I'll deal with $915 now. It's the sacrifice I make. Over 20 years, that's up to $24,000. And a reduction in super balance of 4,217, loss of annual pension income of 311. Looking at a state one, let's look at the Brisbane Municipal Council workers. They've got the 2-year freeze that has been applied to someone who earns, around 77,000, a very average salary, have foregone 2.5% pay increases over 2 years. The cumulative loss over 20 years is over $100,000. So that's a pretty significant burden to be, cost burden to be taking in the supposed interests of the economy. And you look at these numbers and you can only conclude that, firstly, individuals are suffering. But it's also a furphy to say that this is necessary in the interest of the economy. So some of the ways that public sector wages spill over to affect the rest of the economy, and why you can't keep cutting them. There are 3 main ways it does this. So there's the composition effect. The public sector is 15% of all employment, so it pulls down the average. The demonstration effect, and this is what gets to that what I was saying before about government being the largest employer in the economy. So once if government sets a benchmark and says we're going to pay this, it's basically free rein for the private sector to pay comparable skills at the same rate or less. And in the last period of neoliberalisation, where there's been huge contractualisation of our social services, so moving them out of public hands and putting them into private providers, or expansion of new services like the NDIS on market terms. But these are all governed through these contracts. And some of our procurement rules, so the rules that set how that money is spent, say that you can't lift wages. They actually say that this is all you're going to get for your labour costs, or you must compete on cost. And if you're delivering a service which is human-centred, labour cost is going to be your largest cost. So that this is why it creates this perverse incentive to keep cutting wages out of the public sector. Then there's a macroeconomic effect, because obviously lower purchasing power is going to reduce sales and profits for everyone, which reduces investment, and that means there's less people in jobs, more cuts, and then you keep spiraling out of there. This is why it's so important that we protect and maintain a wage base in a crisis. Here's a picture of what happened after the GFC. A lot of the story of the GFC is that we staved off a economic collapse. It's true, we didn't have a massive rise in unemployment, but our wages went seriously south. And a big reason why that happened is because of the period of austerity in 2011 to 2012. So what this graph is showing is overall wage increases between the public sector and the private sector. Public is red, private is blue. So you can see before the GFC, both sectors moving along at an average pace of about 4% a year. And that used to be the normal, right? Now we're hoping for 2%, but actually 4 to 4.5% was normal before the GFC. And then you had a massive contraction. There's that big blue drop there of almost from 4.5, almost 3 percentage points. Say that this is what's normal, that private sector employers, they immediately want to lay people off or reduce their wages bills because they're scared of what's going to happen. But look at the bounce back. And that bounce back in 2011 back to almost their normal rate of 4%. You could easily look at that and say, well, hey, how big was that crisis if they were able to pull back? But look what happened in the public sector. We had wages holding strong at 4.5%, and that's largely to do with the high levels of enterprise agreements. and high levels of unionism overall in the public sector. And so then, thanks ALP Labor government, because that's where the first austerity policy came from, to freeze public sector wages. And in that little period that's circled, what we see is actually after a private sector recovery, you can see immediately the private sector kind of catches up. It goes, oh, all right, if you're going to go that low, then we're going to drop down to the nether regions of 2.5%, and hey, let's just keep going. And obviously the coalition have done a good job at sticking the boot in and giving employers free rein to keep cutting wages. So I think we have a very recent example of why, how it is that public sector wage cuts have a flow-on effect to wages overall. We know that we need a strong wage base because that's how we fuel economic activity. So just checking out the time, I reckon I've got about a few more slides to go, but I thought, is there anyone that wanted to ask any specific questions? I can see the chat box is going bunter.
Yeah, it's blowing up. I'd say it's the biggest chat box we've ever had so far. So you're doing a great job, Alison.
Oh, good. I just I feel like, so is there any things that questions that you guys can filter through and let me address now, or should I just keep going?
We can take a few questions if you like. There's definitely a few so far. One which might be really simple question, which a few people have said they'd like to know the answer to, is what is the difference between economics and political economy? That was from Tim.
So economics began as political economy because there was always a recognition that talking about how we produce and distribute the things we need to survive are political questions. They're questions of power. And what happened over time is so that the classical economists, we hear them all the time, Adam Smith, Ricardo, up with the main ways that the landed gentry, the renters, and the new capitalists, the new producers, produce, and then you had labour and workers. So they recognised that there was a political basis for how they conceived of an economy. And then what happened over time, so then you had Karl Marx came after them. We had this thing called the marginalist revolution, and it was a concerted effort to try and shift economics and the study of economics away from questions of power and politics. I would say, I think any average, any working person would say, of course, the economy is about power. But there's been, this has been a decades-long program building up to the neoliberal period, which is the one we still live in under now. Which has been about peddling this idea that economics is a mathematical pursuit, that there's a model for everything that gives us the correct answers about how it is that we should be designing an economy. I'm all for the use of data and, variables and hard analysis about how it is that we best design society, but I don't pretend that there's no power involved in that. I'm open with my bias. I'm on the side of the majority of people, right? So I have an interest in prosecuting arguments about the economy whereby the majority of people's lives are improved. And I think if we got other corporate economists who get all their power by putting on their suits and you're working for big banks, pretending that they've got all the answers, if we got them to be honest about their bias, we'd probably, they never would, but they'd have to say that they're biased towards a small number of private producers who have an interest in maintaining control over our economy. So that's a little longer than I'd hoped, but it's a complex question. I would say you can't separate them. And if you're interested in economics, then pursuing study of political economy, I think you'll find is really, really exciting and interesting.
That's a very good answer. Fantastic. I might there's been a few questions, but I might just give you one more and then maybe we can go on and we'll have some questions at the end. But this one's just from Andre. It says, we're making arguments. This is going to be a long question, by the way. So we're making arguments about increasing pay in order to help workers stimulate the economy through consumer spending. Do you have any data to where this positive spending effect drops off? For instance, if I'm a senior manager making $120,000 a year and my partner is also working in a good job, the pay increases might go into savings rather than spending the money. Is not doing what we're arguing that it would for society. Any thoughts on that? Where is the Goldilocks zone of consumer spending in Australia nowadays?
Yeah, I think even we saw with the last ABS stats on what happened with all of our main fundamentals. It showed that people saved more than they spent. And I think, do we then ask, did those people save more because they could or because they're scared, right? And this is what happens when you have a crisis, is that people who feel like they're most at risk can also be the ones who put money away. But like, to your question of, for households where they have, two incomes or a high enough income to fund all of their essentials, and they're putting that money away, I would say to those people, if they've earned their income, then of course, what's the problem with doing what they want with it? I think what we're talking about here in this discussion we're having tonight is we don't want to get into trade-offs. We don't want to say that there's any line that a worker doesn't deserve to hold on to the income that they've actually worked for and should be remunerated for. We don't want to get into that trade-off space, because the point is that there is infinite resources, not infinite, but huge resources at the disposal of the government at this point in time, and by a small number of very powerful producers who are pocketing record high profits. And there are a small number of interests that make they make a lot of money out of crisis. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of modelling that looks at optimal income points, but I would say that those studies are taking place in an economy that's not in crisis. And so at this point, people are getting into this, this defensive and savings mindset, because they're saving for the current rainy day while they can, because they want a safety blanket. If the case is, and if you're talking about your hypothetical with yourself, and you've got lots of just, no, it's not.
I don't think it is for Andrea.
Okay, well, I was going to say, and if you're in it for the right reasons, you can make healthy donations to organizations that are fighting. But yeah, I think I'm thinking more about how do we shift resources to get people into work? How do we maintain the strength of the overall economy to allow us to do that? But yeah, I think my overall answer is that we're in crisis. I think people are going to save regardless if there was an optimal point of consumption.
Fantastic. Well, on that, might let you get on with the rest of the presentation, and then we definitely have some more questions for the end, which is great.
Groovy. All right. Well, it's going to go up from here. I've done the doom and gloom, I think, because we're talking. Can you see my screen?
Not just yet.
Oh, I got ahead of myself. Sorry. Share my screen. Screen share. There it is. And do it. And how's that?
Good.
Don't say stimulus. I also have to remind myself to not say stimulus. Why don't we want to say stimulus? Because this is not some short, small amount of pump priming coming from government to try and keep the cogs of the existing economy going. All the cogs are breaking, they're coming apart. And this type of the level of destruction of jobs and industries and our ability to move out of this crisis is going to require reconstruction, what we did in the 1940s, basically. And stimulus is the kind of language that that government want us to be using, because they want us to believe that the private sector is going to lead us out of this crisis, and they just simply cannot and will not. We will have to force them to the table, but we have to do that through using public money. So there are a couple reasons. Well, I guess I've got to those main issues. I think the other one is that we don't want people to go back to work and to just go out shopping and to continue life as it was before. We have to be honest and be upfront that actually there's a very strong possibility of a second wave of infections. Australia has done a really good job at flattening the curve. I don't know why that was hard to find. I've heard it so often. We've done a really good job of that, but all of the other infection patterns in other parts of the world show that second infections or waves are very likely. So our goal is to keep people safe. First and foremost, we want to keep people safe, and we can definitely provide basic incomes to people to allow them to stay safe. And the goal is to support that temporary shutdown until we get to a safer place. So what is this COVID-19 reconstruction plan? What we're talking about is the kind of public sector effort that we had pulling out of the depression of the 1930s, where we sat around and waited for the private sector recovery that never came. And so we waited for 10 years, and kinds of things that we just have to wait. We just wait. It's going to happen. The bounce back, the snapback, it's coming. This level of national income collapse and jobs collapse is so profound that it's quite clear that the current state of this private sector is not prepared. So this is going to be too damaged. We need this whole fully fledged public sector reconstruction plan. Right? It's going to be comprehensive. It's going to be trying to deal with long-term stagnation in so many parts of Australian life. It wasn't all rosy coming into this crisis, and you ask any young person who's been long-term unemployed trying to find work, or anyone who's trying to maintain anything close to a decent living standing in their job. It's been a war, and there's been an erosion of the quality of our public institutions and public life in Australia. So how do we start to address all of the issues we have and rebuild our economy? So some key elements that I've put forward, but the point is that this is a democratic discussion. We have to be expanding the democratic space in Australia to be able to pull this kind of stuff off. We need more voices involved, and not just people in policy or a government. We need to commit to full employment, a genuine commitment to anyone who wants a job being able to have a job. Repair and strengthen, first of all, our health system, because we want to be able to get through this pandemic, but also, the next health crisis that comes our way, because they do hit, and we were up for one. We only have to think about the tireless efforts of nurses who have been dealing with running really strong ratio campaigns in both hospitals, the aged care sector, but we could also look at any other public sector union that's been asking and begging for more resources to be able to improve the service and expand them. Medicare should be so much vaster, right? We should obviously cover dentistry, but the schedule fees that we pay to GPs are too low. Let's make GPs public, let's do stuff like that. Let's repair and strengthen the skills system. Both the university and vet sector are in disarray now. They both share that condition. We need to rebuild technical education and put TAFE at the centre of that process. It has been woefully underfunded for a long time. We only have 30 institutes left, and we can build out of them. Sustained public infrastructure and investment. We need to be thinking about how do we finally stop, sucking the teat of mining, which is dangerous to our long-term capacity to survive on this planet and on this particular country. So what we have to be doing is investing in our ability to produce renewable energy, so we can use that to power things like a new manufacturing sector or a new transport sector. we have to deal with that input first, right? Get out of the fossil fuels and get into investing in renewable energy. Non-market housing. Housing is central to a lot of our economic, political and social problems in Australia. We cannot keep having endless asset price inflation in housing of what is not a commodity, but should be just a public good. It's a social good that everyone deserves to have a home and somewhere safe to live. So a big social housing construction effort would be great. Permanent expansion of our public services, hiring up what there, because the level of dislocation for young people is so vast. We have to be providing direct jobs pathways for young people, and expanding public sector employment is a really important part of that. And community-led development. So we're talking about the governance of all of these arrangements. We need to be building up campaigns and capacity of not just unions, but working in tandem with civil society organisations and communities to start creating community-led development plans. And I put there as an example, local jobs plans. And, in many ways, some of the consciousness around the need for this has already happened with the bushfires, because we have regional communities and rural communities that have been decimated by the bushfires and have just sort of sat there in disarray without any public support or plans about how it is that they actually survive, now that not only have their communities been destroyed, but they've lost their tourism sectors. So I think we need to be building up the level of community participation in this overarching reconstruction plan of sustained public investment. So I keep talking about public investment. I think we need to really nip this in the bud. People are going to keep asking how we're going to pay for it. Public debt is debt that we owe ourselves. It is safe and necessary, and in a time of crisis, it is the responsible and vital, critical ingredient in ensuring that people can continue to have incomes and work, and that businesses continue to function, because the level of contraction in the private sector is so great that it can't, we need the public sector to step up. And of course, on the other side of that, we want to say, well, once we've stepped up and we've provided that public investment, we should have a bigger conversation about what sectors of the economy we think that should be in public hands, I think. After the World War II, our debt was at 130% of GDP, and no one cared at that point, right? Because we were making, weapons, and it was the war effort. And Japan has similarly high levels of debt to GDP. So there's public debt is debt we owe ourselves. The government is the largest economic actor and has the most powerful tools at its disposal to invest, create value, put resources in motion, and then to also pay for that over time in a sustainable way through taxation. But the point is, if this is part of the ideological war that we're in now. If we keep getting stuck on this question of how we're going to pay for it, or this idea of scarcity, we're not going to be able to mobilise the resources we need to get through this time. The debt hawks are circling. Morrison has said, I think today, that continuously they keep telling us but we should do this, but it also costs too much. Free childcare was just cut last week, just the most atrocious decision that is going to stop women from being able to get back to work and push them back into 1950s gender roles. And that was all done on the basis that we couldn't afford childcare. We spend bugger all on childcare compared to other advanced economies. And it's also a policy that pays for itself because it puts women into jobs. And also kids, have better aptitude and capabilities because they've had early education. Anyway, I digress. I got caught up on the childcare issue. I'm very passionate. Financing this debt will be different to this time, but very doable. So the RBA has been engaging in this. I guess they're doing more of this sort of thing now, but it's a less standard way of paying for debt, financing debt, which is called quantitative easing, which is basically they create money and then they buy government bonds and they release those bonds, and that increases the money supply, and that makes borrowing cheaper because there's more dollars around, so it brings down the interest rate. And they hope that by bringing down the interest rate to like near zero, that businesses and people will be more likely to invest. It's getting us part of the way there, but that investment tick isn't quite done through this financing process. It's important for us to maintain a strong sense that the only constraint we have in this time is not a financial one. Public debt is not our problem. The only constraint we have is on the ability of people to work and to be able to contribute and offer whatever they can to being a part of this economy, right, in whatever capacities they have. So I reckon I've got, can I just take a couple more minutes? People, you happy with that? All right, so I'm going to get into a prioritization exercise. What we need immediately is to mobilize all the possible resources that we can into the health response, which has positive economic effects. We want to prevent mass unemployment and want to ensure that we have inclusive income support to all people who need it. Job seekers should be kept at the existing rate. The JobKeeper subsidy should be maintained, and it should be expanded to cover all workers and migrant workers who have been left behind. And then after this health emergency ends, once we get past this point, we want to be talking about that reconstruction plan led by government investment, expansion in public services. We want to be permanently fixing the safety net to include insecure work, dealing with insecure work and maintaining high levels of benefits. And we want to continue to utilise alternative ways of financing our debt and resist this idea that we have to tighten our belts at some point and like the hawks have to come back and take back what they gave. That's not necessary. If we keep growing the economic pie, we don't need to be cutting away from the public. So I put here some specific, just a couple of last slides, specific ideas for rebuilding the public sector, which I have to do as a public servant and a unionist, which is public sector job creation. At this point in time, about 15% of all employment sector. But if you look at economies like Denmark or Sweden or other, advanced economies, their public sector job rates are way up on ours, closer to 30, 40%. So why don't we talk about targeting a public sector job rate? We have to undo decades of the outsourcing damage. And this is one way that we can talk about rebuilding the public sector, is looking at all of the failed marketization experiments in our social services, which have driven down the quality of and the pay of jobs and delivered crapper services. So why don't we in-house all of those social service contracts and expand the number of good jobs in them? Cap consultancy contracts, they are absolute parasites, and a lot of that policy capacity should be inside government. And we have to in-house a lot of IT capability, because that was part of Howard's legacy, as he made sure that we didn't know how to, or didn't have the correct IT capability, and that's why we have had so many bungles in this space. It's very profitable for consultants. We want to end the wage caps and enable genuine bargaining. We need real democracy in the public sector so that people can actually fight for these things on the inside, for the kinds of changes that we know that Australians want on the outside. Finally, organising at scale. I think this is about linking the public projects and those plans and those dreams and those campaigns we have to the strong collective agreements. We want people to be able to say, the average person on the street to say, yeah, I want the job seeker payment to stay at the same rate, but I also want to make sure that there's someone paid at Centrelink with a decent wage who's processing these payments and making sure that people are kept safe. And that's the kinds of thinking I think in public sector unions we need to be fostering, is how do we link the kind of world we want with the quality and the pay of those jobs. And I think we have to imagine a stronger role of unions and social governance in creating this world. This will be an unprecedented, painful crisis, and there are a lot of economic and political dangers at hand, but there's a huge opportunity here as well. We have opportunity to recognise and revalue all jobs, including underpaid and low-valued women's work that's expanded in the last few decades. We can rediscover the importance of public services and infrastructure. We know that Australians care about these things. How do we expand that social contract further and create a new model of growth, which is public-led, more democratic, and focused on meeting human needs? That's me, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll go to questions quickly because I know we've got a little bit of time, but well, a little bit of time. Maybe I'll take one question. So
I'm sorry, I got excited about childcare and other things.
Oh, no, thank you. You haven't just presented us with the economics of what's going on right now. You've given us a vision and expressed that through material means, which is a really special thing to actually get to, hear. So thank you for that, Alison. Now I'm just trying to find, I've got a good question anyway, and it goes back to your childcare passion, which I think Beck and I both share, which is that we're hearing a lot of talk of a tradies recovery, and that means obviously that women who, well, we know that areas such as infrastructure don't employ a whole lot of women, construction don't employ a whole lot of women, and with childcare being taken off JobKeeper, low public sector investment, where can the public sector step in to ensure that women aren't left behind in the so-called recovery?
Yes, there has been terms flying around like pink recession and blue recovery, and I don't want to give it any colours. Yes, but like the government has made three major announcements, right? The first one is infrastructure, which is engineering and construction, the most male-dominated sectors. Home builder, which is fluffing up rich people's houses with predominantly male labour. And the other major decision they made was to cut JobKeeper to childcare. So it's pretty clear what the government spending is entrenching the inequality that's already been borne out in the labour market, because women's jobs have been the first to go, and government is basically ensuring that not only are they not going to have jobs, but they're going to be in the home with their child, and that child's not going to be a childcare. And the childcare sector is the most feminised sector. So public sector jobs are also disproportionately women's jobs. So I think when we're talking about this Reconstruction plan, we're almost like we are talking about women's work. The Australia Institute, I'll just give you just a quick stat, did a study on how many jobs are created per million of investment, of public investment. So if we put 1 million into education, it creates around 11 jobs for women and only 0.2 jobs for women, because if it's in construction. So it shows you the kinds of disproportionate impacts of job creation based on where you put that investment. So if you're going to invest in feminised areas, if we think healthcare and education are important, we are actually saying we want to create more jobs for women. So that's my short answer.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for all of your, I think this has been the most popular, like no one's been talking this much in our webinars before. So it's great that everyone's been so engaged. Thank you for your great questions and comments.